Hello and welcome to Marc Aronson. So we're so excited you're here today. Tell us about your new book, Four Streets and a Square.
A history of Manhattan and the New York idea. So I grew up in Manhattan, lived most of my life there, and that in some way inspired me to write this book. But I have to begin with a question. Anyone listening to this may ask, why should I don't live in Manhattan, I don't live in New York, why should I read a book about the history not only of New York, but of one part of New York? Why is that of interest to me? And the answer to that is my book is about 5 locations in Manhattan: Wall Street, West 4th Street, which is really the Village, Union Square, which was where vaudeville was invented and the center of the city in the 19th century, 42nd Street and the theater district, and 125th Street, the center of Harlem. But the book is really about what I'm calling the New York idea, which applies to everyone everywhere. New York has been home more open to immigrants than any other place on the planet. New York is, for so many people, is where their family came to America. New York pressed together Black and white, Protestant and Catholic, Jewish and Muslim, gay and straight, rich and poor, everyone from everywhere pressed together in a small, small space. Out of this came horrible clashes and oppression and segregation, but also out of this came immense creativity. The songs, the plays, the poems, the novels, the musicals that really tell the American story. From Woody Guthrie writing "This Land Is Your Land" in a hotel on 42nd Street, to a little bit of musical example I'll give you in a moment. New York really has been where, under this intense pressure of being together, mixture happens. It happens in families, interracial families, intercultural families. It happens in culture. It happens in politics. It happens in ideas. And my book is an homage to mixture. I feel like in this time where we're so separated, we're separated in our identities, our politics, our I believe in this and you're that, it's so important to remember the great good that comes when people are forced together to clash, but in that clash also to bring forth something new, something beyond what they were separately. And that's what my book is. And the book actually speaks in 3 different voices. It's written in text. I'm an associate professor at Rutgers. I've done what you see. The book here is resting in a bookshelf of some of the hundreds of books I read to research this. These are the ones I own, equally as many I took out from the library and have since returned. It's also narrated in images. There are over 200 images and 15 maps. I've made use of the immense archival resources that help anyone from anywhere to see the city and see the city as it changed over time, as different people came there. But it's also narrated in a third way, and that I hope really points to the future for nonfiction, especially for young people. Because as I was researching the city's history, I kept finding films and songs and all kinds of documentaries that I thought fit perfectly with my book. And what I decided to do, instead of putting that all in the back where probably very few people would go look at it, instead I've organized all of that on my website, marcaronson.com. And then throughout the book, I have little icons. And that icon tells you right here, there's multimedia. And so you just open your browser, whether it's your phone or a computer you have next to you, or any way of quickly accessing the internet. And you can see the video. You can hear, for example, I said that Fiorello LaGuardia, the 99th mayor of New York, looked a little bit like Bud Abbott of Abbott and Costello. My editor said, will everybody know who Bud Abbott is? And I said, well, here's a video of LaGuardia. Here is Abbott and Costello doing Who's on First, which is memorialized in Cooperstown, and you can make that association yourself. So I wanted to give you all a tiny sample of what I mean. So when I say about the New York idea, New York really was, for all of its tensions and clashes, which I do talk about, the home of integration. So on January 16th, 1938, the very first integrated jazz concert, major jazz concert, was held at Carnegie Hall. And I have the music from that. So as one example of New York as the home of integration, and also to show how the multimedia works with my book, on January 16th, 1938, Benny Goodman with Lionel Hampton played the first integrated jazz concert in America, and I have a recording of the whole concert and the song that sent you out on the streets, the essence of New York. Here's Sing, 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 the first integrated jazz concert that you can hear on my website.
I think we got a good taste of Sing Sing Sing, and it's great to know that it's there and that you can access it on marcaronson.com. So that's Marc with a C, in case anybody doesn't know that already. Yeah, and you have a map of Harlem behind you. Can you tell us a little bit about the research you did for this book? Because I can just imagine all the places it took you.
This book took me 6.5 years to write. And the layers of research there are two great studies of New York from pre the Dutch to World War I, and that is Gotham and Greater Gotham. As you can see, I read them very carefully. But what I did is, as I then came to each sub-moment beyond that, I read the academic literature about that moment. And where I went to primary sources primarily had to do with the multimedia and the images. I found the images to go with it. But I relied very often on academics who carefully studied things. For example, I talk a lot about vaudeville as being where the city mixed in many ways. And the question rationally came up, what did this mean for African Americans? Were African Americans allowed, were the vaudeville locations integrated? Were Black performers allowed to be part of vaudeville troupes? So I found a study of that, and it turned out actually in New York, from very early on in the 20th century, African Americans went to court to demand the right to sit with everyone else in vaudeville, and they won. And so they won those cases. There was a similar case about bus segregation in New York 100 years before Rosa Parks. That was won in New York. So
with a future president as her lawyer, right?
That's right. Chester A. Arthur was Ms. Jennings' advocate. And so I think that, that's what I did, is whenever I had a question, I would pursue it through the academic literature, but try to find in there the nuggets that would make this of interest to readers who were not academics. So what were the stories? What were the people? What were the lives that emerged out of it? But it was a 6.5-year process. First to write, and then I worked a lot of my time was spent on honing the writing. I wanted it to be, again, not an encyclopedia, not a collection of facts, but really narrative and stories and themes. And then the photo research to find the right images. So for example, Don Freeman, whom many of you know from Corduroy and his children's books, did marvelous sketches of the cities in the 40s, of city life. And I know his son, he was my earliest friend, and so I have Don Freeman's sketches of city life. James Baldwin talked about how his life as a teenager was transformed by an artist in Greenwich Village named Buford Delaney, and I found an image, a painting that Delaney did of Baldwin that is gorgeous. And so I was just, it took a lot to find, to illustrate the life in the village of people who were gay and straight and all that. I found sketches drawn by Dejuna Barnes that are just marvelous and really capture that moment. And there's a last thing I have to tell you. There's so much I didn't know. Even though I have a PhD in American history, I studied New York history. For example, how crucially important the experimentation in gender and lifestyle going on in the village was for the Harlem Renaissance. They are so directly connected, and I found the letter that establishes that. And so I did feel like that was original research that really changed the narrative of the city, where you see that the sense of self-acceptance and pride in being a gay man, this was County Cullen, the poet, and Elaine Locke, Dr. Elaine Locke, the first African-American Rhodes Scholar, led directly to the sense of pride and achievement and assertion of the Harlem Renaissance. When Elaine Locke gave the lecture called The New Negro, which was directly linked to this sense of pride in himself, in his sexual identity and gender identity. And so it was really quite thrilling to discover how the boundaries that were broken, the lives that were opened up in all of New York fed other lives. And so back to my initial question, I hope this is a book that people can use not just for some unit on some aspect of American history or New York history, but to really look at how much is possible when we are pressed together, when we have to see ourselves differently, when we have to make space for others, and where we steal from each other, adopt from each other, work together, and build something new. And that's really what this book is a testament to and what it's about.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to tell us about this amazing new work. And it sounds like something we can spend a lot of time with. We'll bear rereading and so much more information at marcaronson.com. So
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for talking with me.